You never asked for their permission to exist. Dylan Reed stood quietly at the marble reception desk of Harbor Grand Hotel in downtown Boston, raindrops still clinging to his brown hair. His khaki pants and simple polo shirt marked him as ordinary in a space designed for the extraordinary. Behind the polished granite counter, General Manager Brad Thompson adjusted his navy blazer and studied the application form with growing distaste. "We don't have any openings for your type," Brad announced, his voice carrying across the opulent lobby like a declaration. Several guests turned from their leather armchairs to watch. Business travelers paused their phone calls. Hotel staff pretended to organize files while stealing glances at the unfolding drama. Dylan's wedding ring caught the light as he placed both hands flat on the counter. The simple gold band had been a gift from Marcus 3 years ago on their wedding day in Cambridge. They had adopted Emma, their 8-year-old daughter, from foster care just last winter. The ring represented everything Brad's expression suggested didn't belong in a place like this. "Sir, I'm just asking for an interview opportunity," Dylan said calmly. His architectural firm had designed sustainable buildings across New England, but today he was testing something far more important than his professional qualifications. He was measuring the character of the company he was about to inherit. Brad's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Look around you, son. This is Harbor Grand. We cater to Boston's finest families. Old money, tradition. Our guests expected a certain standard." He gestured toward Dylan's casual clothing with barely concealed contempt. "We need managers who understand discretion, who fit the image our clientele expects." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished flame. Dylan felt the familiar tightness in his chest that he'd carried since coming out at Harvard Business School. The same feeling that crept in when conservative board members questioned his leadership style. When clients assumed Marcus was just a friend. When Emma asked why some kids at school said families like theirs weren't real. A woman in a burgundy dress shifted uncomfortably in her chair nearby. She had been watching the entire exchange, her coffee growing cold as she witnessed what she recognized as discrimination wrapped in corporate politeness. Other guests busied themselves with their phones, unwilling to interfere in someone else's humiliation. Dylan nodded slowly and picked up his torn application. He had expected this response. His grandfather had built the first LGBT-friendly hotel in Boston, back when such acceptance required courage that could cost everything. 3 generations later, Dylan was discovering that prejudice had simply learned to dress better and speak more carefully. "I understand your position completely," Dylan replied, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. He turned toward the revolving door, leaving Brad to savor what felt like a small victory over the forces threatening his carefully ordered world. But victories built on cruelty rarely last longer than the time it takes for truth to change clothes. Harbor Grand Hotel was about to learn that sometimes the person you underestimate is exactly the one who holds your future in their hands. The revolving door spun slowly behind Dylan as he stepped into the Boston afternoon. The spring air carried the scent of cherry blossoms from the nearby common, but Dylan barely noticed. His mind was focused on something deeper than personal insult. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been judged by appearance rather than character. Dylan pulled out his phone and typed a message to his husband. "The test is complete." Marcus would understand without explanation. They had discussed this moment for months, knowing that inheriting the hotel chain would require more than accepting financial responsibility. This moment reminds us that dignity isn't determined by designer labels or family names, but by how we treat those we believe have no power to affect our lives. Because power, like respect, has a way of shifting when we least expect it. 5 minutes can reshape a lifetime. Brad Thompson was still straightening his blazer when the first black sedan pulled up to Harbor Grand's valet station. Then came another, and another, and another. 4 vehicles total, their tinted windows reflecting the Boston skyline like dark mirrors hiding secrets. The lobby had returned to its usual rhythm of polite conversations and clinking coffee cups. Brad stood behind the reception desk, sharing his victory story with assistant manager Sarah Chen, a Harvard graduate who had worked her way up through sheer competence despite facing her own subtle barriers as an Asian American woman in Boston's Old Boys Network. Did you see how quickly he left? Brad chuckled, adjusting his tie with satisfaction. Some people just don't understand what it takes to maintain standards in an establishment like this. We can't just let anyone walk in off the street expecting special treatment. Sarah nodded politely, but something cold had settled in her stomach. She had watched the entire exchange, recognizing the coded language and carefully constructed prejudice that reminded her of her own struggles in the hospitality industry. She had learned to navigate these waters carefully, keeping her head down while building an impeccable record that nobody could question. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, both of them watched as men in dark suits stepped out of the vehicles with military precision. Their movements suggested security detail, corporate protection, the kind of presence that accompanied either significant wealth or serious power. One spoke into a small microphone attached to his wrist. Another surveyed the surrounding streets with eyes trained to notice threats. "That's interesting," Sarah murmured, watching the coordinated arrival. She had worked at enough high-end events to recognize executive security when she saw it. This wasn't politicians or entertainment celebrities. This was business, and it was serious business at that. Brad puffed up his chest, assuming the arrival validated his perception of Harbor Grand as a destination for important people. Must be some corporate executives or investors checking out the property. Good timing, actually. They'll see we know how to maintain appropriate standards around here. But as the lobby doors opened and the advance team entered, something in their bearing suggested this visit was neither scheduled nor routine. The lead security officer approached the desk with the calm authority of someone accustomed to clearing paths and arranging access. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his expression neutral but alert. "We'll need the lobby cleared for a private meeting," he stated rather than asked. "Nothing dramatic, just ensuring privacy for our principal." Brad's eyes widened as he processed the implications. Private meetings in hotel lobbies weren't standard practice unless something significant was about to unfold. "Of course. Absolutely," Brad stammered, suddenly unsure of his footing. He began directing guests toward the restaurant and bar areas, his earlier confidence replaced by nervous energy. Sarah watched him scramble to accommodate demands he didn't fully understand. Recognizing the irony of his sudden deference to authority he couldn't identify. The lobby gradually emptied except for essential staff. Sarah remained at her post, curiosity overriding caution as she wondered what kind of business required this level of coordination. In her 3 years at Harbor Grand, she had never witnessed anything quite like this systematic transformation of public space into private meeting ground. The revolving door turned once more, and this time the person who entered commanded attention without speaking a word. The man wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. His presence filled the space with quiet authority, the kind that came not from loudness, but from certainty. Behind him walked another man whose bearing suggested legal background. Both men moved with the measured confidence of people accustomed to making important decisions. "Good afternoon," the first man said to Brad, his voice carrying the accent of old New England money. "We're here about business that requires immediate attention. Something tells me you're going to want to sit down for this conversation. Truth has perfect timing." The lobby doors opened again, and Dylan Reed walked back into Harbor Grand Hotel. This time he wasn't alone, but he wasn't leading the procession either. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was, every step deliberate and sure. Brad Thompson's face drained of color so quickly that Sarah Chen thought he might faint. The expensive suit, the security detail, the corporate lawyers. Everything suddenly clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle he should have recognized from the beginning. The young man he had dismissed and humiliated just minutes ago was walking toward him, flanked by the kind of power that could reshape lives with a single decision. "Mr. Thompson," the lead attorney began, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority, "I'd like you to meet Dylan Reed, the new majority owner of Harbor Grand Hotel and the entire Reed Hospitality Group. The acquisition was finalized this morning." Brad's legs felt weak. The words hit him like physical blows, each syllable rewriting his understanding of the past hour. Dylan Reed. The Reed family name was legendary in Boston hospitality. Old money, old influence, the kind of family that had shaped the city's business landscape for generations. And he had just told the heir to that empire that there were no openings for his type. Sarah's eyes widened as she processed the implications. She had witnessed discrimination disguised as professional standards, and now the victim of that discrimination stood, revealed as the person with ultimate authority over everyone's future. The irony was so complete it felt like justice wearing a perfectly tailored suit. Dylan stepped forward, his earlier casual clothes replaced by attire that clearly announced his position without apology. The transformation was striking not because his clothing was expensive, but because his bearing now reflected the confidence of someone who no longer needed to hide his true identity or test the character of his employees. "Mr. Thompson," Dylan said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority, "I believe we had a conversation earlier about standards and discretion. I was testing the culture of this establishment that I was about to inherit. What I discovered was deeply disappointing. The security team positioned themselves strategically around the lobby, not as a threat, but as a clear indication that this was serious business being conducted at the highest levels." Sarah realized she was witnessing a moment that would be remembered and discussed in hospitality management circles for years to come. Brad tried to speak, but words wouldn't form. His mouth opened and closed without sound as his brain struggled to process the complete reversal of his assumptions. The young man he had dismissed as unworthy was actually the person who now controlled his career, his livelihood, and his future in the industry. Dylan turned to address the remaining staff members who had been quietly observing from various positions around the lobby. "When I walked in here earlier today wearing casual clothes and asking for an interview, I was judged not by my qualifications, but by assumptions about what kind of person belonged in this space." His voice carried clearly through the lobby, reaching every corner where staff members stood transfixed. Sarah found herself holding her breath, realizing that everything she thought she knew about this place was about to change. "More importantly," Dylan continued, "I was discriminated against because of who I am and who I love. My husband Marcus and I have been married for 3 years. We have an adopted daughter named Emma. None of that should matter in determining my professional capabilities, but it clearly influenced the reception I received." The corporate lawyer stepped forward with documents that would reshape the hotel's future. Dylan hadn't just inherited a business, he had inherited the responsibility to build something better. "But before we discuss the future," Dylan said, looking directly at Brad, "we need to address what happened today. Discrimination wrapped in corporate politeness is still discrimination. Justice doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes quietly, wearing a well-tailored suit and speaking in measured tones that carry the weight of institutional change." Dylan Reed stood in the center of Harbor Grand's lobby, surrounded by witnesses to a transformation that would reshape not just one hotel, but an entire approach to hospitality leadership. "Mr. Thompson," Dylan began, his voice steady and professional, "your employment with Reed Hospitality Group is terminated effective immediately. The decision has been made not in anger, but as a necessary step to ensure that our values are reflected in our leadership." Brad's legs gave way and he sank into one of the leather chairs that had been occupied by guests just an hour earlier. The finality of Dylan's words hit him like a physical blow. His 20-year career in hotel management, his reputation in Boston's hospitality industry, his financial obligations and family responsibilities, all of it now hung in the balance because of a moment of prejudice he had thought was simply maintaining professional standards. But Dylan wasn't finished. He turned to face the assembled staff members, his expression shifting from stern authority to something warmer, more inclusive. His grandfather had taught him that true leadership meant building up rather than simply tearing down, creating opportunities rather than just removing obstacles. "Sarah Chen," Dylan called out, and she stepped forward with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. Sarah had watched the entire discriminatory exchange earlier, and Dylan had noticed her discomfort with Brad's behavior. "You've been with Harbor Grand for 3 years. Your performance reviews are exceptional, and I've been informed that you've consistently advocated for more inclusive policies." Sarah nodded, still uncertain about where this conversation was heading. She had indeed pushed for diversity training and more equitable hiring practices. suggestions that Brad had routinely dismissed as unnecessary complications to their streamlined operations. She had learned to pick her battles carefully, advancing her concerns when possible while avoiding direct confrontation that might threaten her own position. Effective immediately, Dylan announced, "You are being promoted to General Manager of Harbor Grand Hotel. Your first priority will be working with our human resources team to implement comprehensive diversity and inclusion training for all staff members. We're not just changing policies, we're changing culture." The lobby erupted in spontaneous applause from the remaining staff members. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in shock, tears forming in her eyes as she processed the magnitude of this unexpected opportunity. In a single moment, she had gone from assistant manager to general manager of one of Boston's most prestigious hotels. Dylan raised his hand for quiet and continued addressing the team. "Over the next 90 days, we'll be conducting a complete review of our hiring practices, promotion criteria, and guest services standards. Every employee will participate in training designed to ensure that Harbor Grand becomes a welcoming space for all guests and a supportive workplace for all team members." He paused, letting the implications settle across the staff members who had been silently enduring various forms of workplace bias, housekeeping staff who had been overlooked for advancement, front desk aides who had faced criticism for their accents, servers who had been assigned to less visible shifts based on appearance. All of them now stood in a lobby where change was actively beginning. The corporate lawyer stepped forward with additional documentation. Reed Hospitality Group is establishing a confidential reporting system for discrimination. Reports will be investigated independently, and retaliation will result in immediate termination. Dylan looked around the lobby, his gaze settling on each face. "My grandfather built the first LGBT-friendly hotel in Boston. When doing so required courage that could cost everything. He understood that hospitality means creating space where everyone feels valued. That's the legacy we're continuing." The transformation of Harbor Grand Hotel had begun not with grand pronouncements, but with the recognition that respect and inclusion must be actively built into every interaction. Real change happens when leaders understand that their values must be lived, not just posted on websites. 6 months later, Harbor Grand Hotel stood as something entirely different. The marble floors still gleamed under crystal chandeliers. The leather furniture still invited guests to settle into comfort, but the atmosphere had transformed in ways that couldn't be measured by luxury amenities or star ratings. It had become a place where dignity was the true standard of service. Sarah Chen stood behind the reception desk where Brad Thompson had once held court, reviewing the hotel's latest guest satisfaction scores. The numbers told a story of transformation that went beyond operational excellence. Comments from guests consistently mentioned feeling welcomed, respected, and valued regardless of their background or family structure. A young couple approached the desk, both men wearing matching wedding rings and carrying adoption paperwork for their upcoming family court hearing. They needed a quiet space to review documents and prepare for one of the most important days of their lives. Sarah smiled warmly and personally escorted them to a private conference room, ensuring they had everything needed for their preparation. This was the Harbor Grand that Dylan Reed had envisioned, where hospitality meant creating space for life's most meaningful moments without judgment or hesitation. The hotel had become a sanctuary for travelers who had previously felt the need to research whether they would be welcomed or merely tolerated. Dylan walked through the lobby during his weekly visit, observing the seamless interactions between staff and guests. The diversity training program had evolved beyond mandatory sessions into an ongoing culture of learning and growth. Employees now felt empowered to suggest improvements, report concerns, and contribute ideas that enhanced the experience for everyone. Marcus joined him near the windows overlooking Boston Common, their 8-year-old daughter Emma racing ahead to press her nose against the glass and watch the swan boats in the public garden lagoon. Their family had found peace in the knowledge that Dylan's inheritance came with the responsibility to build something worthy of his grandfather's vision. The woman in the burgundy dress, who had witnessed that first discriminatory encounter months ago, approached Dylan with a smile. She had become a regular guest, bringing business colleagues and friends to experience what she called authentic hospitality. She understood that she was supporting an establishment that had chosen inclusion over exclusion, growth over stagnation. Three other Reed Hospitality Group properties had undergone similar transformations, each adapting the inclusion model to their communities while maintaining the core principle that respect must be actively practiced, not passively assumed. The company had become a case study for effective cultural change, but the most meaningful measure of success came in smaller moments. A transgender business traveler who no longer needed to research policies before booking, an elderly same-sex couple celebrating their anniversary without worrying about staff reactions, international guests feeling welcomed despite cultural differences. Dylan received a letter from a young hospitality student who had chosen his career after learning about Harbor Grand's transformation. The student wrote about wanting to build hotels where his mixed-race family would feel comfortable, where his immigrant parents would be treated with respect. These stories reminded Dylan that change ripples outward. One hotel's commitment to inclusion had inspired other businesses, influenced hiring practices, and created space for people to exist authentically while traveling. Standing in the lobby where prejudice had once disguised itself as professional standards, Dylan understood that his grandfather's legacy lived not in buildings but in moments when dignity prevailed over discrimination. The true measure of hospitality was whether every person who walked through those doors felt genuinely welcomed. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with someone having courage to see beyond assumptions and wisdom to build bridges instead of walls. When we choose inclusion over exclusion, understanding over judgment, we create spaces where everyone's story matters. Have you ever witnessed discrimination disguised as professional standards? And what did you do about it? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe to Heart Stories for more real stories about courage, dignity, and the power of choosing inclusion over indifference.